We are thrilled that you all have joined us. I would like to acknowledge that I'm joining from my office located on Piscataway and Susquehannock land, currently known as Baltimore, Maryland. It is my pleasure to welcome you to our virtual artist talk given today by Tracy Wilkinson. She is a short-term resident here from March through the end of the month. For more information about our artist talks, please visit our virtual library at baltimoreclayworks.org. And I will now turn it over to Tracy.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tracy Wilkinson. I'm a short-term resident here at Baltimore Clayworks, and I'm really happy to be here. Happy to see you. I'm originally from England, but I've lived in the United States now for 35 years, and I currently live and work out of Los Angeles, California. I mostly hand build with coil and slab, some pinch pots and hollowed out forms. And I fire generally between cone 3 and 6 on mid-fire range. I also work with glass, so I fuse glass and hand cut it, and I use it within those ceramic pieces, which I can explain to you later. I was born in the United Kingdom, in the north of England, and my parents were a teacher and a accountant, so there wasn't a huge amount of creative life in my home life, but my grandmother sewed and knitted, and I think I got my love of working with my hands from her, pretty much. And you know, in England, the weather is pretty inclement, so you're doing a lot of stuff inside, and I would draw and make all the time. That was kind of my thing. So I went on to do a bachelor's degree in fashion and textile design in the UK, and then got my master's degree from the Royal College of Art in London. And I became a designer in London for a couple of years before some friends of ours that were contemporaries at college had moved to New York and sent us these amazing letters of life in New York City, and it sounded amazing. And so moved to New York and started looking for a job. Lived in New York and worked there for 4 or 5 years before getting another opportunity in Los Angeles, and moved there and stayed there ever since, working as designer, design director, and such, up until I started my own company in '99, where I basically had a contemporary fashion line that I sold to better specialty stores like Barney's, Fred Siegel, and such for almost 10 years. Then in 2008 was the crash. My partner at the time really wanted to close the company. And honestly, I was ready to close it. I wanted to move on to different things, to more opportunities. So in 2008, that's what we did. I'm still a freelance designer. I work in fashion still, keeps the wolf from the door, and do ceramic artist as the thing that I really love. Sorry, I'm not able to scroll down. Here we go. I wanted to show some of my fashion stuff. First, this is a concept board that I did for a client. I generally do these regularly, seasonally. They're usually to show color mixes and blends, and also the type of fabrics that I'm using. This is another collection that I did in the last few years for a contemporary line in Los Angeles. Here's an example of some of my drawings and how they then become realized into some clothing. This is from Hansel from Basel, I think from 2018. And these are who I'm currently working with now. So I'm freelancing for all of these companies. Block Shop Textiles is a Los Angeles-based small company that they do mostly homewares with Indian block prints, and they wanted to go into clothing, so I'm helping them with their clothing line. Wyeth is another contemporary line that I've worked with. And then Kilty is a luxury sweater brand that I've been working with for 5 years and continue to work with them. And like I said, I still really enjoy this. And when I work freelance, it gives me time then obviously to work on the ceramics while still being able to pay the mortgage, etc. So like I mentioned, when I closed my company in 2008, I was a little bit lost. I was not really sure what I wanted to do. And I had been out to Sam Malouf's house in Claremont, California, and you can see him there on the right, top right. A woodworker, amazing guy. He's since passed, but his team still works on, and they manufacture these chairs, handmade chairs and cribs that have years, like 20 years waiting list for these things. But what was inspiring about him was he built this house from scratch, including everything in it. So the staircase there you can see he had built, and the table, even down to the latches on the doors, which I thought was incredible, so inspiring. So I decided I was going to do that and started woodworking. I went to Otis evening class and started to make this couch, which is still in my house, still standing, which is great. But I also started to realize that when you're working in fashion, you're working with a lot of people. There are graders, there are pattern makers, sewers. I just wanted to work on my own. And when you work with these large pieces of furniture, you're kind of forced to work in a studio where the machinery is and you need help. And it was kind of not really what I wanted to do. So after I finished that piece, I decided to turn my attention to ceramics. And like I said earlier about wanting to make everything in my home, I didn't actually get around to doing that until the pandemic. And these were the pots. You can see on the left are my IKEA pots, and on the right are the pots that I made myself that I use every day now. So this is me in my studio, which was downstairs in my house originally. I had wanted to make some hanging plant pots only because I couldn't find any in the marketplace. And at Sam Malouf's house, he had a bunch of them on pulleys hanging from the kitchen ceiling. I thought it was amazing. So I started to make those. They're just very simple, obviously slab pots. And I continued to make those for friends. And they then showed them to stores, and then the stores started buying them. And I was suddenly in business making pots, hanging planters. Around that time, my friend, who's an architect, Simon Story, showed me some models that he had worked on at SciArc in his architecture thesis. And they were basketry. They were basically made of basketry. And I was so taken with them that he promised to show me how to do the weaving on my pots. And you can see on the left there, that's the first one I made with the basketry wrapping around it. And then I started to move kind of upwards above the pot, enjoying that kind of space in between. And that's when it kind of got exciting. And around that time, my dad was diagnosed with cancer, and the family decided that every year we would go to Europe somewhere and have a holiday together while we still could. And we went to Lisbon one year, and I was in a castle, as you do in Europe. And I saw a bunch of broken pots in a case. And I was thinking how amazing that would be to mend them, you know, to bring them back to a full form. So that's when I started to experiment with what you can see on the left, which I call the Barsha pots. And they're all different. I hand wove each of those, and I got the shape and the undulating textures from the pressure of my hands in weaving, and also the negative space there. And then you can see on the right, which is more of what I used to call a wave pot, that was where the weaving just started on one side. And those were a little bit freer. I mean, they could actually like flow over the pot onto the floor. And they were really successful, actually, sold a lot of those. And then this was my show of that series of work called Sota Grande. This was in Los Angeles. And you can see they got a lot bigger. I started to be more interested in the form of the ceramic piece, and the weaving started to get smaller in some ways. And then once I was done with the show, I rarely did any more of the weaving. It was almost like that was it. I started to do smaller bits, as you can see here, on some of the larger pieces, but really this was about me learning to build bigger. I used mostly slab up until this point. and I hadn't really used any coil techniques. And so I was just learning kind of on the job, making these pieces. And you can see there on the right side, there's some holes starting to take shape. I'm trying to figure out how to work with bigger pieces and what they'll take and how they look. And around that time, I became really interested in architecture. I mean, I kind of always had, but I had gone back to my love of tattooing from Star Wars. That was such a pivotal moment for me in my life. Coming from England, where houses are little boxes, little brick boxes, and then to see tattooing and see these rounded organic shapes was like super inspiring to me. The top two images are actually by Claude Costi and Pierre Haussmann. They were Swiss-French people, I think, architects, and they built these amazing houses that are almost like sculptures themselves. And then below that are the Nadir Kahili, who worked out of California, but he was, I think, Iranian. And these are the shelters that he makes from sandbags. He was very interested in alternative ways of building. And what I find fascinating about these is just how organic and primitive they are, but they also look super modern and futuristic. And actually, they were the models for tattooing from George Lucas. Here's from Star Wars. I'm sure this is a set, but also just amazing how primitive it looks, but also very modern. And there's the another image of the helmet of Luke Skywalker, which I thought was also very inspiring shape-wise. And then this is Paolo Soleri, another inspiration of mine. He was a student of Frank Lloyd Wright, actually, originally. He was an architect and urban planner. And in the 70s, he had bought this massive plot of land in Arizona. And he wanted to build a utopian place where, a community really, where you'd use less waste and, there'd be less water needed. Everyone would live together. It was, very utopian. And he actually slip cast a lot of these buildings in the ground. And then it's amazing to go and see them. They're still around. Cosanti is now kind of an event space, but you can stay there and visit. And then Cosanti was his house, which is super, super like futuristic and amazing. And also has a foundry and I think has a ceramic facility there too. So here you can see how my work kind of was developing then. The maquettes in the front were kind of the ideas for totems that I was doing. I was really just kind of practicing my building skills and trying to figure out how much I could get away with without them sinking into themselves or cracking in the kiln. And on the right side are some vases that I was making around that time. I think see how I was inspired by some of the architecture. Here are some of my earlier pieces too. Once again, trying to figure out how I wanted the work to look. These are actually high fire, so they're underglazed, which is why I think you get machine. And the color here is royal blue, but in the high fire, it came out kind of a navy color, which I love. So those are some of the early pieces. And then I had gone to LACMA. They had an exhibition of Mayan artwork and buildings, like pieces from buildings. And I just loved some of the imagery on those pieces, and I've started to use it here. I was also coincidentally learning how to build on an armature, which is the piece on the left. And so these are why these look so kind of crazy. But I loved where these were going. It just wasn't quite where I wanted it to be at this point. So now we come to the glass. I had heard, as most people know, there's a JPL in Pasadena, which is part of NASA, and they send out a lot of the rovers from there, the Mars rover, etc. And at the end of this year, they're going to be sending a rover to Europa, which is one of Jupiter's suns. And I'd heard about this, and I heard how the planet has a thin crust of ice around it. And I thought that was fascinating. It has like a massive ocean underneath, bigger than ours. And I think the people at NASA think that there are signs of life there, and they're going to go and explore it. So what I was trying to do with the glass was then I went to Judson Studios, which is a really good glass studio in LA, and they were kind enough to help me try to put a skin of glass around kind of a moon pot, a planetary looking pot. As you can see, it did not work. The annealing of the glass is different to the ceramic, and after a few tries, it was becoming kind of expensive. There's still a way to do it, and I still feel like I will want to do that in the future. But at this point, I thought, you know what, I need to learn more about glass. And so I decided to buy myself a kiln. And there's the kiln on the right with some of my early glass trials where I was fusing glass together. I didn't love it. I mean, it was kind of, at first I was like, oh, it's kind of interesting, but it was really flat and it wasn't really what I was trying to do. What I was becoming interested in is, you know, how in the past, when we were watching Star Wars and we were doing all that early space exploration, it was an adventure, you know, it was something exciting. And it's become recently seemingly something we might need to do, is leave the planet. And so it has a different meaning. But the ceramic and work kind of represents the strength of our ingenuity, you know, how technologically we can send things to space, or we can send a rover to Jupiter. I think it's just incredible. But then the glass represents us and our vulnerability as humans and our fragility. And not only us as people, but also our natural world, you know, our gardens and our plants and everything we're surrounded by that we take for granted. How would we take that? So I wanted to these to look more like gardens, more like flowers. And I was really inspired by Pierre Rudolph's work. This is the Hauserworth in the UK. His work is incredible to me. I love the way he uses color balance. And obviously these are all self-pollinating. They all work together as a system. And that was just something that I wanted to kind of reflect in my glass work. So these are my first initial tries at doing 3D glass. I work with foam core initially because glass is super expensive to work with and really time consuming to cut. So I would do these models and then figure out where I wanted the glass to be, where the color balance would be in the shapes. And on the right side is my first glass piece, Seed. And then this was my next glass piece, Dandelion. This was a little bit more challenging because it has double pieces of fused glass that are then connected by the cross pieces. And it's very heavy actually once it's put together. This is my first space bloom, which is the series I was just talking about the fragility of human life, you know, collaborating with the strength of the ships. That's the foam core that I did as a template for the glass. And then on the right side, you can see how the glass is produced. There's two layers of art glass there. So there'll be a colored layer and a clear layer that I melt in the kiln, fuse it in the kiln. And then once it's out, I trace those pieces onto the glass. And you can see there on the left corner that there's a chapstick. And that's because when you Sharpie onto glass, because you're working with wet machinery, the Sharpie just lifts off and you're halfway through a cut and you've no idea where you're going. So the chapstick actually just gives you a barrier. So it actually makes the Sharpie stick to the glass there. Here's another example of the vellum that I use. Once I've done the foam core, I trace that onto vellum because you can get a much cleaner outline on the vellum. And then I trace that onto the glass using the little tabs there. I cut out the tabs and that will allow them to interconnect. And here is my beloved machine. It's a ring saw, diamond ring saw. And under that grate is water. So that water splashes up as you're cutting. And it helps to cut the glass. Every machine you use with glass has got water, some of differing degrees. The grinder's not too bad. That one doesn't splash too much. The sander is terrible. And that's how I end up looking on the right-hand side once I'm using the sander, absolutely drenched. Here's another image of the color balance. I generally work in my journal as I'm sitting having tea in the morning, and I just work out where I want the color to be. I've already figured out the shapes. I just want to figure out the color balance. Obviously, the uncolored is the clear. I generally work with softer colors, probably because of the inspiration of Peter Rudolph. And I've tried with the bright colors and I never really like it. And then here is an example of how the gardens are put together with the notches and the shapes. And for the surface of the ceramic, these on the left are my test tiles, because I did flat tiles and it never came out the same. It almost had to be the exact shape and type of detailing for it to work. And I used terrace sigillata on these. I don't use it in a traditional sense. Terrace sig is like a very fine slip. I color the slip with mason stain, and then I actually use a ball milling machine to make sure that the color is evenly distributed within the terrace sig. And then I paint that on the surface of the greenware. And what I've been doing, I kind of figured out after much trial and error, is to put it into cone 3 all the way up without doing a bisque. And I can get this really interesting cracking situation. Doesn't always work out. Sometimes it cracks off, and that's a bummer when you've done a massive piece. And sometimes it doesn't crack at all. So, you know, I don't always make it, but I feel like I'm getting closer every time. And then here are 2 of the pieces that were in my show. And here's an example of me learning by trying how the glass works and doesn't work. On the left side, having 3 entries for the glass is so much more stable than having 1, which is on the right side. The right side, actually, after I did my show, was trying to move it and it broke. So that one I have to remake. But the one on the left side is much more stable. It also has much bigger well of the glass underneath inside the pot, which is also hugely important. So I'm living and learning as you go along. Here is my show, Space Bloom, and this was in LA, September of last year. There were 12 pieces here. All of them are terracage, and all of them had glass. Actually, I think you can see one behind that is dandelion that was in the show that's just glass. Some of these go up to like 36 inches tall, so they're quite difficult to move. Luckily, the glass mostly flat packs. I do them in sections, so I can flat pack the glass and take it out of the ceramic piece. So here we come to Baltimore Clay Works, and I was so happy to come here and be really focused for 3 months on making new work. And I had some ideas of the things that I wanted to achieve while I was here. One of them was a different surface. I love the terracage and will continue to do it, but I also wanted to have some more surfaces that would work as well. I don't love glaze, so it's one of those things where I'm trying to figure out what I can do that has some surface interest but isn't shiny. So the first week I went to the Space Museum in DC, and I was really interested in the heat shields. I loved just how they are obviously protective of the ship, and I love the texture of them. And then the radar dishes, obviously that was something for communication that's very interesting, and I wanted to add those to some of my work as well. And actually the tubes, I wanted to add tubes to the pieces as well, which you'll see in some of the pieces. It's just, I was really just exploring new shapes, new additions that I could put onto the pieces. So the first week or so I was here, I was just drawing. These are watercolors that I did. They're quite small, and I was trying to figure out shapes before I even started making. And I did quite a lot of these, and what I did then was just pick through them and decide which shapes looked good as far as making maquettes from there. And some of these other pieces you can see are just test tiles above. I then took some of those smaller images and did them bigger and put them on the wall. I find that when I sit and look at these for long enough, I figure out which ones I want to use, also using different textures. You can see the pieces below. That's kind of how I build. So there's some slab on the right side, there's coil in the middle, and then the ones on the bottom are mostly pinch pots. Some of them, the larger ones, are hollowed out. And then on the right, you can see my first attempt at pipe, which I was very happy with. And I'm hoping I can do more of those, different ways of doing that. And also the heat shields. You can see there where I just did kind of a version of a heat shield too. And these are the greenware. So these were unfired at the time. What's interesting about being on the East Coast is obviously the clays are different. And I was unsure of what clays to use. So I picked a bunch of different ones. On the left is a speckle clay. And on the right is a very dark black clay, which you'll see in the next slide, finished. So there on the left is the speckle clay. That I did not do any surface treatment. I may cold finish it when I get home, but I'm not sure. I do quite like the surface there, although there is a crack in it. I'm not sure I'm going to do that. And then you can see how amazing that black clay is on the right. It has tons of grog. I loved it. I didn't want to put anything on that. I thought it was just really special as it was. And then this has kind of been the most exciting thing that's happened, in that when I was at a residency in Woodstock last summer, and there was a gentleman there who's in charge of the ceramics program, Rich Conti, and he handed me an envelope with a recipe and was like, "You're going to really like this glaze." And I never did anything with it. I saved it. And then when I came here, I was like, I'm going to try that glaze. And I tried it on one pot. Didn't work out so well, but I kind of figured out from that one how to do this one. So I put 2 layers of underglaze underneath the, it's called a high alumina glaze, matte glaze. And it has a very stone-like texture. And so I added it then with a sponge, a couple of coats with a sponge. This is not ideal. I obviously need to work on my carving skills, glazing skills, but I felt like it was a really good start, and I was excited about how it came out. And I'm going to definitely try and do more tests when I get home in this glaze. And these are my socials. My Instagram is TW Workshop, and then tracywilkinson.com is my website, and there's more information there on like my artist statement, CV, and more of the historical work as well as like current work too. So thank you so much for joining me. And that's it. I think we're going to stop and do some questions.